My parents texted exactly 3 words, "Don't wait up," then showed up at a charity gala 3 blocks away, where they publicly declared the family's worthy heir. They called my engagement party a joke of a celebration, but I brought along a thin folder, something that could change the entire Blake bloodline's color in just one evening. By the time the party ended, the microphone fell from my father's hand. The stage lights dimmed, and the electronic board behind him displayed numbers he never imagined he'd have to read aloud before all of Chicago's elite. My name is Emery Blake, and I've spent 30 years learning that love in the Blake family comes with a price tag attached. The fairy lights we'd strung across the restaurant's private room cast everything in a warm glow that Saturday evening. 60 of our closest friends had gathered at this cozy spot in Wicker Park, the kind of place with exposed brick and craft cocktails that my parents would call trying too hard to be authentic. Noah's hand found mine under the table as his sister raised another toast to our future. I should have been completely present in that moment. Instead, my phone screen glowed with those 3 words that somehow managed to cut deeper than any lengthy explanation could have. "Don't wait up." My mother's text arrived at 7:43 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after our engagement party officially began. No apology, no excuse, just dismissal, clean and efficient like everything Vivian Blake touched. "Everything okay," Noah whispered, his architect's eye catching the shift in my expression. I showed him the screen. His jaw tightened that subtle tell that meant he was choosing his words carefully. "Their loss," he said finally, loud enough for only me to hear. But it wasn't just their absence that stung. Sarah, my college roommate, had been scrolling through her phone when she suddenly froze. "Em," she said carefully, turning her screen toward me. "Isn't this—" The Chicago Society pages had already uploaded their coverage of the Heritage Foundation's Autumn Gala. There, in a photo time-stamped 8:05 p.m., stood Charles and Vivian Blake in their formal finest. My father's hand rested on my brother Lucas's shoulder while my mother beamed at the camera. The caption read, "Blake Dynamics CEO Charles Blake with wife Vivian and son Lucas, who sources say is being groomed to take over the family's industrial equipment empire." 3 blocks. They were 3 blocks away, playing Dynasty while I celebrated one of the most important moments of my life. "Turn it off," Noah said quietly, but firmly. Sarah immediately darkened her screen, but I'd already memorized every detail my mother's emerald gown that she'd bought specifically for important occasions. My father's proud stance, Lucas's uncomfortable smile that meant he knew exactly what they were doing. The restaurant had a large screen on the wall, usually reserved for displaying the evening's specials or ambient visuals. Someone from the Heritage Foundation must have been live streaming because suddenly there they were, larger than life, as my father took the podium. "Family legacy isn't just about blood," his voice boomed through someone's phone speaker that had been turned up too loud. "It's about vision, capability, and the strength to make difficult decisions. Lucas represents the next generation of Blake leadership, someone who understands that success requires sacrifice and standards." Standards. There it was, the word that had haunted my childhood. I wasn't up to Blake's standards when I chose user experience over business school. I wasn't meeting standards when I dated a middle-class architect instead of someone from their North Shore circle. And now, my engagement party, the celebration of my choice to build a life with someone who actually saw me, that was below standards too. "Should I turn it off?" the restaurant manager asked, gesturing to the screen where the feed continued to play. "No," I said, standing up slowly. "Leave it on." Something crystallized in that moment, watching my parents perform their privilege while my friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't just about a missed party. This was about 30 years of being the wrong kind of daughter, the one whose accomplishments didn't translate into their kind of currency. My best friend Marcus said, "You don't have to watch this." But I did. I watched my father announce Lucas's promotion to senior vice president, effective immediately. I watched my mother dab at her eyes with theatrical pride. I watched the crowd of Chicago's industrial elite applaud while 3 blocks away, The people who actually loved me sat in stunned silence. A joke of a celebration, I said quietly, remembering my father's words from last week when I'd told them about the party. He'd said it casually, like commenting on the weather, not even looking up from his Wall Street Journal. Noah stood up beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. "You want to leave?" "No." I picked up my champagne glass, still full, and raised it high. "I want to make a toast." The room quieted, all eyes on me. On the screen behind me, my father continued his speech about legacy and worthiness. "To standards," I said, my voice carrying clear and strong. "To knowing your worth even when your own blood tries to convince you otherwise. To choosing love over legacy, and to remembering that the best revenge isn't getting angry, it's getting everything." Why, I drained my glass in one smooth motion, set it down with a decisive click, and smiled. Not the polite smile I'd perfected at countless Blake family functions, but something sharper, more real. "Now," I said, turning to Noah and then to our gathered friends. "Let's celebrate. We have an engagement to honor and a future to build, one that doesn't require anyone else's approval or attendance." The room erupted in cheers, but I wasn't done processing. As I accepted hugs and congratulations, my mind was already working, cataloging data points like I did with user behavior at North Star Labs. My parents had just shown their hand publicly, made their choice clear for all of Chicago to see. They thought they understood the game legacy, power, the careful cultivation of influence, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing: I was still their daughter. I'd learned from the best, and I was done being invisible. The first time I understood I was the wrong kind of Blake, I was 12 years old, sitting in my father's study while he reviewed quarterly reports with Lucas. Then, just 15. "See this margin here." Charles pointed at a spreadsheet, his finger tracking across columns of numbers. "That's what efficiency looks like. That's what matters." I'd been sketching in the corner, working on a design for our school's literary magazine cover. My mother walked in, glanced at my drawing, then at Lucas, bent over the financial statements. "Emery, darling, why don't you go help Martha with dinner? This is important family business." Family business. Even then, the irony wasn't lost on me. I was family, wasn't I? Growing up in the Blake household meant Sunday dinners that felt like board meetings. My father would quiz Lucas on market trends while I pushed food around my plate, invisible unless I spoke too loudly or laughed at the wrong moment. Achievement was measured in profit margins and connections. My straight A's in literature and art meant nothing compared to Lucas's B+ in economics. Creative types don't run empires. My father once told me when I'd won a state competition for interface design in high school. They work for people who do. The pattern was established early. Lucas attended Northwestern for business. I went to RISD for design. Lucas interned at Goldman Sachs. I worked at a nonprofit teaching kids coding. Lucas got a car for his graduation. I got a lecture about finding a husband who could provide stability. But here's what they missed while they were grooming their golden child. I was learning too. Not their lessons about leverage and hostile takeovers, but something more subtle: how to read a room, how to spot patterns in behavior, how to identify what people needed before they knew they needed it. Every dismissed achievement became data, every casual cruelty, a lesson in human psychology. While Lucas learned to read balance sheets, I learned to read people. I remember the Thanksgiving when I was 25, fresh into my role at North Star Labs. I'd just led the design for an app that increased user retention by 40%. When I tried to share the news at dinner, my mother redirected the conversation to Lucas's promotion at Blake Dynamics. "Technical work is so specific," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Lucas is learning to see the big picture. That's what leadership requires." That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the participation trophies they'd never bothered to replace with my actual achievements. The room was a shrine to their indifference, same pink wallpaper from when I was 7. None of my design awards displayed. Photos from family vacations where I stood slightly apart, like I'd been photoshopped in after the fact. But the real revelation came 2 years ago at my father's 60th birthday party. The North Shore Country Club, 200 guests, a careful choreography of wealth and influence. I watched him introduce Lucas to every important contact, watched my mother steer conversations toward her son's accomplishments. When someone asked about me, my mother said, "Oh, Emery does something with computers. Very modern." Something with computers. 4 years of design school, 6 years building products that actual humans used daily, reduced to something with computers. That's when I started keeping my own ledger, not of money or connections, but of oversights. Every time they underestimated me, I filed it away. Every dismissal became fuel. The skills they'd forced me to develop by neglecting me observation, analysis, pattern recognition turned out to be worth more than an MBA. While Lucas learned to operate within their system, I learned to see the system itself, its weaknesses, its blind spots. "You're too sensitive," my mother would say when I was younger, upset about being excluded from yet another business dinner with just the three of them. "The world isn't going to coddle you, Emery." She was right about one thing: the world wouldn't coddle me. But she was wrong about sensitivity being a weakness. Sensitivity meant I noticed things others missed, like how my father's jaw clenched when quarterly numbers disappointed, like how my mother's charity friends whispered about safety violations at Blake Dynamics plants, like how Lucas, for all his grooming, looked miserable every time our father mapped out his future. The truth was, they'd created the perfect conditions for their own blindside. They'd taught me to be invisible, to operate in shadows, to build without fanfare. They'd forced me to find worth outside their metrics, allies outside their circle, power outside their hierarchy. Standing in that restaurant, watching them on screen at their gala, I thought about all those years of being told I wasn't the right kind of Blake, all those dinners where my achievements were footnotes to Lucas's potential, all those moments of being present but unseen. They thought they'd raised a disappointment. Instead, they'd raised a strategist. They just didn't know it yet. The data was all there, had been accumulating for 30 years. Every slight cataloged, every pattern mapped, every weakness identified. I'd spent a lifetime learning their system from the outside. Now it was time to show them what that education was worth. Monday morning at North Star Labs started like any other: glass walls, standing desks, the hum of focused productivity. But I wasn't thinking about our latest sprint review. I was thinking about leverage. "Emery, you good?" Dev asked, one of our senior engineers, noticing I'd been staring at the same line of code for 5 minutes. "Perfect," I said, minimizing the window. Behind it was something else entirely: OSHA violation records for manufacturing plants in Illinois, searchable by company name. The project that had consumed my last 18 months at North Star wasn't just about user experience. We'd built a comprehensive safety monitoring platform for industrial facilities sensors that tracked everything from air quality to equipment maintenance cycles. The system had reduced workplace accidents by 28% in our pilot facilities. Clean, quantifiable impact. But here's what my father never understood about something with computers: data doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about your last name. 3 months ago, I'd started a side project with Dev and 2 other engineers. We called it Aegis, and on paper, it was just another analytics tool. In reality, it was a risk assessment platform that could evaluate any manufacturing operations vulnerabilities using publicly available data: OSHA reports, insurance claims, maintenance records, supplier delays. Feed it a company name, and it would spit out a comprehensive risk profile. I'd been testing it on Blake Dynamics for weeks, under the pseudonym E. Rowan. Of course. "You still working on that side thing?" Dev asked, glancing at my screen. "Just running some models," I said. "Hypothetical scenarios." The hypothetical scenario was my family's company hemorrhaging money through preventable safety violations while my father preached about efficiency. The Joliet plant alone had racked up 6 minor infractions in the past quarter. Minor to him, maybe. Not to the workers who'd filed complaints. Not to the insurance companies raising premiums. My phone buzzed. Mara Whitfield, the legal advisor who'd helped structure Aegis as a separate entity. Coffee. We need to discuss the Stone and Harbor meeting. Stone and Harbor, the investment firm that had shown interest in Aegis after our quiet demo last month. They specialized in companies that solved expensive problems for traditional industries. Everything my father claimed to value: efficiency, innovation, profit wrapped in a package he'd never recognize as mine. I met Mara at a coffee shop in the Loop, far from both North Star's Wicker Park office and Blake Dynamics' River North headquarters. "They're in," she said without preamble. $2 million seed funding for 30% equity, but they want to keep the Rowan identity quiet for now. Something about strategic advantage. Strategic advantage. If only they knew. "There's more," Mara continued. "Gideon Park wants to meet with you." I nearly dropped my coffee. Gideon Park was a legend in Chicago finance, the kind of CFO who could restructure a Fortune 500 company over breakfast. More importantly, he sat on 3 boards that did business with Blake Dynamics. Why, he saw the Aegis demo, says it identified risks in his portfolio that his team missed. He wants to discuss a proposition. That afternoon, I sat across from Gideon in his Michigan Avenue office, the city sprawling below us. He was 73, sharp as surgical steel, with eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Rowan," he said, using my pseudonym with a slight smile. "Your tool flagged something interesting about Blake Dynamics." My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "Oh, they're over-leveraged. Specifically, they've secured loans against equipment that your analysis suggests will require replacement within 18 months. The banks don't know this. The board doesn't know this, but your algorithm does." He leaned back. "I've known Charles Blake for 20 years. Brilliant businessman. Blind to operational details. Always has been. Delegates too much. Trusts the wrong metrics." "I wouldn't know," I said carefully. "Wouldn't you?" His eyes glinted. "The interesting thing about data analysis, Ms. Rowan, is that it often reveals the analyst as much as the subject. Your algorithm doesn't just identify risks. It identifies them with an almost personal insight into how certain executives think." He slid a folder across the desk. "I'm not interested in destroying companies, Ms. Rowan. I'm interested in saving them from themselves. Blake Dynamics needs operational reform. The question is whether that reform comes from inside or outside." Inside the folder were financial projections for Blake Dynamics, not the rosy ones my father showed investors, but real ones based on Aegis's analysis. They weren't catastrophic, but they showed a clear pattern without significant operational changes. The company would face a creditor review within 12 months. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing you aren't already building," Gideon said. "Continue developing Aegis, make it indispensable. And when the time comes, because it will come, be ready to offer a solution that benefits everyone. Workers, investors, even stubborn CEOs who can't see past their own spreadsheets." As I left his office, I realized something: I wasn't just building a product anymore. I was building a new kind of power. Not the kind my father understood: hostile takeovers and aggressive expansions, but something subtler. The power to see problems before they manifested, to offer solutions before anyone knew they needed them. That night, I worked late at the North Star office, refining Aegis's algorithms. Each line of code was a thread in a larger web, one that my family couldn't see forming around them. Dev stopped by my desk around 9:30 p.m. "You're putting in serious hours on this side project." "It's important," I said. "Important how?" I looked at him, this brilliant engineer who'd believed in my vision without knowing my real name. "Important like knowing you can prevent accidents before they happen. Important like proving value doesn't always look like what people expect." He nodded slowly. "This is personal for you." "Every good product is personal," I said. "Otherwise, why build it?" But as I typed, I wasn't thinking about products or platforms. I was thinking about my father's words. Creative types don't run empires. Maybe not, Charles. But they can certainly reprogram them. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. I sat in my apartment at 2:15 a.m. 3 monitors glowing with data streams from Aegis. Blake Dynamics filled every screen OSHA violations, insurance claims, maintenance delays, supplier complaints. The pattern was so clear it might as well have been written in neon systematic neglect of safety protocols in favor of short-term profit margins. The Joliet plant was the worst. 17 safety incidents in the past year, each one carefully documented as minor to avoid triggering regulatory reviews. But Aegis saw through the classifications. When you aggregated the data worker compensation claims, equipment failure rates, near-miss reports that never made it to OSHA, the real picture emerged. My father was sitting on a time bomb, and he was about to light another match by promoting Lucas to COO. I pulled up the corporate structure documents I'd accessed through public filings. Blake Dynamics had borrowed heavily against their equipment assets $40 million from Midwest Industrial Bank, another $20 million from smaller regional lenders. The loans came with standard covenants, maintain certain safety ratings, keep insurance premiums below specified thresholds, avoid regulatory sanctions. According to Aegis's projections, they'd breach at least 2 of those covenants within the next quarter. My phone buzzed. Mara, despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either," she asked when I answered. "Looking at Blake Dynamics' debt structure. Find anything interesting? They're vulnerable. Specifically, their Series B notes from Midwest Industrial. $22 million secured against the Joliet plant equipment. The covenant triggers if their safety incident rate exceeds industry standards by more than 15%. And they're at 13.7% as of last week. Silence on the other end. Then, one significant incident would push them over. Or one comprehensive audit that reclassifies their minor incidents appropriately." Mara's voice sharpened. "You're not thinking of, I'm thinking of buying that debt," I said. "Through Rowan Capital. The bank would sell it. They're nervous about the exposure, even if they don't know exactly why they should be. We offer them 90 cents on the dollar. They walk away clean. That's $20 million. Stone and Harbor would back it if we showed them the analysis. It's a distressed debt play with a clear path to resolution. Resolution being... I stared at my father's photo on the Blake Dynamics website, that confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. New operational leadership. Someone who understands that worker safety isn't a cost center, it's a profit driver. The next morning, I met with Stone and Harbor's senior partners in their Loop office. I presented as E. Rowan, founder of Aegis Analytics. They didn't need to know Rowan was my middle name, inherited from my grandmother who my parents never talked about because she'd been a labor organizer. "Blake Dynamics," said Harrison Stone, studying my analysis. "Charles Blake's company. They're supposedly rock solid." "Every rock has fault lines," I said. "The question is whether you see them before the earthquake." I walked them through the data. Safety violations trending upward. Insurance premiums set to spike at the next renewal. The Joliet plant 1 incident away from a federal inspection that would uncover years of papered-over problems. "And you're proposing, we buy the distressed debt through a holding company. When they breach, which our models say will happen within 60 days, we don't call the loan immediately. Instead, we offer a restructuring deal, bring in Aegis as their safety monitoring system, insist on an independent safety officer with board oversight, and require operational improvements that will actually protect workers while improving their bottom line." Or, asked the other partner, Diane Harbor, "or we exercise our rights as senior creditors and force a change in operational leadership. Either way, the company gets saved from itself." Harrison leaned back. "You've thought this through, almost like you have inside knowledge." "I have better than inside knowledge," I said. "I have outside perspective. Sometimes that's worth more." They agreed to back the play. $25 million available for distressed debt acquisition, with Aegis positioned as the solution regardless of which path the restructuring took. That afternoon, I watched from a coffee shop as my father's Lincoln Town car pulled up to Blake Dynamics headquarters. Lucas emerged from another car, following him inside. They were probably finalizing his COO announcement, planning the gala where they'd present him as the future of the company. My phone showed an alert from Aegis new OSHA complaint filed at Joliet plant. A worker had reported improper chemical storage that had been addressed 3 times before without actual changes. I did the math. If OSHA investigated and found what I knew they'd find, Blake Dynamics would hit a 14.9% incident rate, still technically within covenant limits, but close enough to spook any creditor paying attention, which meant it was time to make sure someone was paying attention. I composed an email to Midwest Industrial Bank's risk assessment team from my anonymous Aegis account. Subject line, Complimentary Risk Analysis, Blake Dynamics Debt Exposure. The attachment contained just enough data to raise questions without revealing everything. Safety trends, insurance projections, peer company comparisons that made Blake Dynamics look like exactly what it was an accident waiting to happen. Within 3 hours, I had a response. They wanted to discuss our analysis. They were reassessing their industrial portfolio. They were interested in exploring options. By the end of the week, Mara had made contact through Rowan Capital. Midwest Industrial was willing to sell the debt at 88 cents on the dollar. They wanted it off their books before the end of the quarter. They're scared, Mara reported. Your analysis spooked them properly. $22 million for control of Blake Dynamics' most vulnerable pressure point. My father had taught me that business was about leverage. He just never imagined I'd been taking notes. I signed the papers as E. Rowan, CEO of Rowan Capital LLC. The bank didn't care who I was as long as the check cleared. Stone and Harbor transferred the funds. Just like that. I owned a piece of my father's empire. He didn't know it yet. Lucas didn't know it. They were still planning their gala, their announcement, their careful succession plan that assumed the ground beneath them was solid. But I knew, and soon, when the moment was right, they would too. The email came that evening from Gideon Park. Heard about your acquisition. Interesting play. The November gala should be illuminating. November. 6 weeks away. Blake Dynamics' 35th anniversary celebration, where my father would formally announce Lucas as COO and heir apparent. I marked it in my calendar, though I needed no reminder. Some dates you carry in your bones. The plan came together like code, each element building on the last, creating something elegant in its precision. Mara and I met every Tuesday at a different location, mapping out what we called the engagement switch. The name was Noah's contribution, after I'd finally told him everything. He'd listened to the whole story, then said, "So you're going to engage them on their own terms." The wordplay was too perfect to ignore. 3 pressure points, Mara said, spreading documents across the table at a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown where no one from the North Shore would ever venture. First, the debt we now control through Rowan Capital. Second, the safety covenant that's one incident away from triggering. Third, the board's fiduciary responsibility if presented with a viable solution. I pushed the dim sum aside, pulling up Aegis on my tablet. The Joliet plant had another near miss yesterday. Worker almost caught in machinery that should have been locked out during maintenance. It's not in the official reports yet. How do you? I've been in touch with someone inside. Anonymously. They've been documenting everything, waiting for someone to listen. The worker, Tony Gonzalez, had been sending reports up the chain for 2 years. They disappeared every time, marked as addressed without any actual changes. I'd found him through Aegis's analysis of worker compensation claims he'd filed 3 in 5 years, all for preventable incidents. The covenant trigger, Mara continued, gives us the right to demand immediate repayment or accept alternative arrangements for debt restructuring. We'll offer the alternative Aegis implementation plus board oversight. My father will never accept outside oversight. He will if the alternative is losing control entirely. The second phase required more finesse. Through Gideon Park's connections, I arranged meetings with 3 Blake Dynamics board members. As E. Rowan from Aegis, I presented our safety platform as an investment opportunity, casually mentioning how it had identified risks in certain industrial equipment companies that traditional audits missed. 2 of them bit immediately, asking if we could run analysis on their portfolios. The third, Margaret Walsh, was sharper. "This is about Blake Dynamics, isn't it?" she said after the presentation. I kept my expression neutral. "We analyze many companies. Charles Blake is brilliant but stubborn. He still thinks safety regulations are suggestions rather than requirements." She studied me carefully. "You remind me of someone." "I have one of those faces." "No, it's the way you present data, like you're playing chess 5 moves ahead. I've only known one other person who thinks like that." My heart hammered, but I maintained eye contact. "Hopefully someone successful?" "Very." "She just doesn't know it yet." The third element was the most delicate and the most satisfying. "We're moving the second engagement party," I told Noah one evening as we reviewed invitation designs. "The Lakeshore Hotel, November 15th. He looked up from his laptop. "That's the same night as my father's gala, same building, different ballroom. Ours is on the 12th floor, theirs is on the 14th. I want our friends there, our real family. Let Chicago see that we're celebrating our future while they're trying to control theirs." Noah studied my face. "This isn't just about the party." "No, it's about showing them that their approval was never needed. And when everything shifts that night, I want the people who actually matter to be there with us." We booked the space under Noah's name. The Lakeshore's event coordinator mentioned the Blake Dynamics Gala when she saw the date. "Big night for the building," she said. 2 major celebrations." "Yes," I agreed. "It will be memorable." The final piece required media involvement. I reached out to a Chicago Tribune reporter who'd been covering workplace safety issues, through encrypted emails as E. Rowan. I fed her enough information to start investigating Blake Dynamics' safety record. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked during a phone call on Signal. "Because workers deserve better than PR spin, and because sunlight is the best disinfectant." "You're suggesting there's something that needs disinfecting." "I'm suggesting you look at the Joliet plant's last 5 years of incident reports. Compare what was filed with OSHA versus what workers reported internally. The discrepancy tells a story." She was interested. More importantly, she was thorough. Her investigation would take weeks, but I knew she'd time her story for maximum impact. Journalists loved anniversary pegs, and Blake Dynamics' 35th year celebration was too good to pass up. Timeline, Mara said during our final planning session. "November 15th, 7 p.m. Both parties start, 8:30 p.m. The covenant triggers when the Tribune story goes live with the latest Joliet incident. 9 p.m. You present the restructuring offer to the board. 9:30 p.m. My father realizes his older daughter owns his debt, has a solution to his problems, and a seat at the table he never offered. And if he refuses, I thought about 30 years of being told I wasn't enough. Then Rowan Capital exercises its rights as senior creditor. We demand immediate repayment, which he can't provide, forcing him to accept our terms or face bankruptcy proceedings. That's aggressive. That's business. He taught me that, even if he doesn't remember the lesson. The invitations for our engagement party went out that week. Elegant, simple, nothing like the gilt-edged productions my parents preferred. The response was immediate and warm. Everyone would be there. Including, I suspected, some unexpected guests. Because Margaret Walsh had RSVP'd yes, and she wasn't someone Noah or I had invited. "Chess moves," I murmured, looking at her response. Everything was in position. The debt secured, the covenant one breath from triggering, the media primed, the board aware, the solution ready. All the pieces my father had taught me to value: leverage, timing, information asymmetry arranged on a board he didn't even know existed. 6 weeks until November 15th. 6 weeks until the engagement switch flipped. 6 weeks until Emery Blake finally became visible. November 15th arrived wrapped in early winter chill and the kind of crystalline Chicago evening that made the skyline look like it was cut from black glass and light. I stood in the 12th floor ballroom of the Lakeshore Hotel at 6:45 p.m., watching the city spread below. Noah adjusted my necklace, a simple silver piece, nothing like the emeralds my mother wore to galas. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 30 years. Our guests began arriving right at 7. Friends from college, colleagues from North Star, Noah's architecture firm partners. Real people with real warmth, filling the space with genuine laughter. The contrast to what was happening 2 floors above us couldn't have been starker. Sarah pulled me aside. "Margaret Walsh is here. Did you invite her?" "No," I said, watching the board member enter with a knowing smile. "But I expected her." At 7:20 p.m. My phone buzzed. The Tribune's website had just posted, "Investigation Blake Dynamics Hidden Safety Crisis Internal Documents Reveal Pattern of Suppressed Reports." The story was thorough, devastating, and completely accurate. Tony Gonzalez was quoted extensively. There were photographs of unsafe conditions, copies of buried reports, a timeline showing how incidents were systematically reclassified to avoid regulatory scrutiny. At 7:35 p.m., the Lakeshore's event coordinator found me. "Ms. Blake, there's been a request to share the main display screen between both events tonight. The Blake Dynamics team wants to stream their announcement." "Of course," I said, "but we have a presentation scheduled for 9 p.m. as well. Make sure the AV team knows." She nodded and hurried off. Behind her, I saw Mara enter with Gideon Park. The players were assembling. At 8 p.m., the screen in our ballroom flickered to life, showing the gala 2 floors above. My father stood at the podium, my mother beside him in emerald green, Lucas looking uncomfortable in a tux that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. 35 years of excellence, Charles began, his voice filling both rooms. Tonight, we celebrate not just our past, but our future. I'm proud to announce. His phone buzzed, then another, then what seemed like every phone in the room. The Tribune story was spreading. I watched his face change as someone whispered in his ear, probably about the article. But he was Charles Blake, the show must go on. "I'm proud to announce that Lucas Blake will be taking on the role of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately." Applause from their room. Silence in ours. My friends knew what this meant, what was about to happen. At 8:20 p.m., a new player entered our ballroom, Harrison Stone from Stone and Harbor, carrying a leather portfolio. "Ms. Rowan," he said loudly enough for Margaret Walsh to hear. "The covenant has been triggered. Midwest Industrial Bank has been notified." Margaret's eyes snapped to me. The pieces were clicking for her. At 8:35 p.m., I watched the feed from upstairs as David Brennan, Blake Dynamics General Counsel, rushed to my father's side. The color drained from Charles's face as he read whatever David showed him on his tablet. At 8:45 p.m., my phone rang, my father's number. "Hello, Charles," I answered. Not Dad, not anything familial. "What have you done?" His voice was ice and fury. "I've acquired your debt. The Joliet plant pushed you over the covenant threshold an hour ago. You have 2 options except a restructuring that includes Aegis implementation and independent board oversight, or face immediate repayment demands you can't meet. Who are you working with? Who's behind this? I am just me, the daughter you called a joke." Silence. Then Emery. "E. Rowan, my middle name. Remember, though I doubt you do." At 9 p.m. sharp, the screen in both ballrooms changed. My presentation began not hostile, not vindictive, just clear. Aegis Analytics safety platform, the lives it had saved, the money it had generated through prevented incidents, and the partnership offer for Blake Dynamics full implementation, board oversight, and a new operational structure that prioritized both profit and people. The final slide showed the leadership team. Independent COO to be selected by the board, safety oversight by Emery Blake, whose expertise in data analysis and operational efficiency had created the solution Blake Dynamics desperately needed. The feed from the 14th floor showed chaos. Board members huddled in corners. My father stood frozen at the podium. My mother's perfectly composed face had cracked into something like shock. But Lucas was looking directly at the camera, and he was smiling. Just slightly, but it was there. At 9:15 p.m., Margaret Walsh stood in our ballroom. I motioned for an emergency board meeting. All in favor. 3 other board members I hadn't even noticed were there raised their hands. A majority. Motion carries. Mr. Blake, Ms. Blake, please join us in conference room A. My parents entered our ballroom at 9:25 p.m., their gala abandoned. They looked smaller somehow, out of place among the fairy lights and warmth of our celebration. My father's eyes found mine across the room. For the first time in 30 years, he was really seeing me. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Welcome to my engagement party. Don't worry, you're not too late for the important part." The board meeting was swift. Mara presented the terms complete Aegis implementation, an independent COO search, me as board observer with safety oversight, and a commitment to bringing all facilities to zero harm standards within 24 months. "This is extortion," my father said. "This is business," Gideon Park corrected. "Your daughter has identified a critical weakness and provided a solution. You can accept it or explain to shareholders why you let pride crash the company." At 9:47 p.m., they voted. Unanimous approval for the restructuring. At 9:51 p.m., Lucas approached me. "You could have destroyed us," he said quietly. "You were never the target," I replied. "And honestly, you look relieved." "I am. I never wanted co-o. I wanted to teach. Dad just never asked." We stood there, 2 Blake children raised for different destinies, finally speaking truth. At 10 p.m., the screen updated one last time. The announcement was simple. Blake Dynamics was entering a new phase of operational excellence, with a commitment to becoming the industry leader in workplace safety. My name was there, finally. Not as the forgotten daughter, but as the architect of their salvation. The microphone was still live when my father spoke, his words carrying to both ballrooms. "I underestimated you." "No," I said, taking Noah's hand. "You never estimated me at all. There's a difference." The conference room felt smaller with all of us in it. My father stood at one end, I at the other, the mahogany table between us like a battlefield. "You orchestrated this," he said, voice flat. "Every piece. I learned from the best." "This isn't what I taught you." "No," I agreed. "You taught Lucas. I taught myself." My mother hadn't spoken since entering the room. She sat rigidly, her emerald earrings catching the light with each shallow breath. Finally, "How could you humiliate us like this?" "The same way you humiliated me. Publicly, deliberately. The only difference is I included a solution." "We're your parents." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Parents show up. Parents see their children. You saw an investment that didn't yield expected returns. I opened the white envelope I'd been carrying all evening. Inside the debt purchase agreement, the covenant documentation, the Aegis implementation proposal, and the insurance company's letters confirming they'd only maintain coverage with new safety leadership. 3 major insurers will drop Blake Dynamics without these changes, I said, sliding the papers across. You lose coverage. You lose contracts. You lose contracts. You lose everything. This isn't revenge, it's math. Charles picked up the papers, his hands steady despite everything. Still the CEO, even now. He read quickly, efficiently, and I saw the moment he understood the completeness of it. The anonymous safety reports. That was you feeding information. No, that was Tony Gonzalez and 17 other workers whose concerns you buried. I just made sure someone finally listened. The bank selling our debt was spooked by accurate risk assessment. Aegis doesn't lie, Dad. It just reveals what's already there. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. The workers, are they really at risk? 23 preventable injuries in the last 18 months, I said, looking at my brother. 4 of them life-altering. 1 worker, Marcus Thompson, lost 3 fingers because a machine that should have been locked out wasn't. He has 2 kids. His wife works 2 jobs now. Lucas paled. I didn't know. Because knowing wasn't your job. It was his. I pointed at our father. But spreadsheets don't scream, so he didn't hear them. Margaret Walsh cleared her throat. The board has voted. The restructuring moves forward with or without your cooperation. Charles, the question is whether you do this gracefully or force us to explain to shareholders why we had to remove you. You don't have the authority. Actually, Gideon Park interrupted. With Rowan Capital controlling your senior debt and the covenant breached, Ms. Blake does have that authority. She's offering you a lifeline. I suggest you take it. My father's jaw clenched. What exactly do you want? Emery, I want workers safe. I want the company profitable through sustainability, not shortcuts. I want Lucas free to choose his own path. I paused. And I want you to say it. Say what? That I was never a joke. That my engagement, my career, my choices, they were never beneath Blake's standards. Say it in front of this board, in front of Mom, in front of everyone who matters to you. The room went silent. Even the city noise seemed to fade. Charles Blake, titan of industry, looked at his daughter, really looked at her for perhaps the first time. You were never a joke, he said quietly. I was a joke of a father who couldn't see value unless it wore a suit and spoke in quarterlies. My mother made a sound not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Your engagement isn't beneath our standards, he continued. It's above them. You chose love. We chose logistics. Charles, my mother warned. No, Vivian, we did this. We created this moment through 30 years of choices. He looked back at me. Your career isn't something with computers. It's something I couldn't build technology that actually helps people instead of just counting them. The words hung in the air like a confession. I accept the restructuring, he said finally. All of it. Charles. My mother stood abruptly. Sit down, Vivian. His voice carried exhaustion I'd never heard before. Our daughter just saved the company. The least we can do is let her... I felt Noah's presence behind me before his hand touched my shoulder. He'd been standing in the doorway, watching. There's one more thing, I said. The safety improvements aren't just policy changes. I want college scholarships for every injured worker's child. I want Marcus Thompson's medical bills covered retroactively. I want Tony Gonzalez promoted to head of safety compliance with a direct report to the board. That's millions. That's justice, and it's non-negotiable. My father looked at the papers again, then at me. You've thought of everything. I had 30 years to plan. He signed. One signature, then another, then another. Each one a small surrender, a tiny admission that the daughter he'd dismissed had become the one holding his future. When he finished, I took the papers and handed them to Mara. File these tonight. The announcement goes out Monday morning. Wait, Lucas said. What about me if I'm not COO? You're free, I said. To teach, to travel, to find out who Lucas Blake is when he's not being groomed for someone else's dream. He looked between our parents and me, then smiled, really smiled for the first time all evening. Thank you. My mother stood to leave, then turned back. The engagement party, the one we missed. Would you? No. I said simply. That moment passed. You chose a gala over your daughter. I'm choosing my future over your regrets. She flinched but nodded, understanding that some bridges, once burned, only light the way forward. The company will thrive, I said as they reached the door. The workers will be safe. The board will be satisfied. You'll keep your positions, your reputation, your fortune, but you'll know every day, in every meeting, with every decision that the daughter you overlooked is the reason why. Charles paused at the threshold. I know you won't believe this, but I'm proud of you. You're right, I said. I don't believe it, but maybe someday you'll earn the chance to say it again and mean it. They left, diminished somehow, as if the armor of their certainty had finally cracked. The board members filed out, leaving me alone with Noah and Mara. The weight of what just happened should have felt crushing. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. "You need to get back to your party," Mara said. "Your real party." We returned to the 12th floor where our friends waited. The moment the elevator doors opened, the room erupted. Not the polite applause of a Blake Dynamics gala, but real celebration cheering, hugging. Tears from Sarah, who'd watched me shrink at every family dinner through college. "Ladies and gentlemen," Noah said, taking the microphone, "I'd like to present my fiancé, Emery Blake, who just proved that the best revenge isn't getting angry, it's getting everything." But I took the microphone from him, looking at the room full of people who'd chosen to be here, who'd celebrated with us when my own blood couldn't bother. "That's not quite right," I said. "The best revenge isn't getting everything. It's realizing you already had what mattered." I clicked to the final slide of my presentation, not the corporate restructuring, but something else entirely. The North Shore Safety Fund, established in Noah and Emery Carter's names. Carter, Noah's last name, which would be mine too, soon enough. "Every penny of personal profit from this restructuring goes here," I announced. "Workplace safety education, support for injured workers' families, scholarships for their children. Because our engagement isn't a joke, it's a promise, to build something better than what we inherited." The dashboard appeared on screen, 24-month timeline, 0 harm targets, compensation metrics for workers, real numbers, real lives, real change. "My parents thought success meant standing above others," I continued, "but Noah taught me it means lifting others up. So this fund, this commitment, this is our engagement gift to Chicago, to every worker who deserves to come home safe, to every family that shouldn't have to choose between dignity and survival." Margaret Walsh, still there, stood and started clapping. Then Gideon. Then everyone. "Your father's watching," someone said, pointing to the screen where the feed from the 14th floor still played. Charles Blake stood in his emptying ballroom, watching his daughter's speech on the screen above. The microphone was still live up there, and his words carried down, "Motion passed." Not about the board vote that was already done, but about something else. Something in his eyes as he watched me transfer millions into a workers' safety fund. Maybe, finally, understanding what he'd missed. Lucas appeared in our doorway 10 minutes later, having fled the funeral atmosphere of the gala above. "Can I stay?" he asked quietly. "It's an engagement party," I said. "Everyone who celebrates love is welcome." He hugged me then, the first real embrace we'd shared in years. "I'm going to resign Monday," he whispered. "Take that teaching position at Northwestern I turned down. Dad will rage, but you're free now. We both are." As the party continued, I slipped onto the balcony with Noah. The Chicago skyline glittered, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its shadows. "Any regrets?" he asked. "None. You." "Just one." He pulled me closer. "I should have suggested we elope." I laughed, really laughed for the first time all evening. "And miss all this, your family." "My family is in there," I said, gesturing to the warm light of the ballroom where our friends danced. "Blood just shares DNA. Family shows up. At 11:45 p.m. The band played our song, not something classical or ceremonial, but the indie track that had been playing in the coffee shop where Noah first said he loved me. We danced while snow began to fall outside, dusting the city in temporary grace. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "The fund is a good idea. I've instructed finance to match every donation." I showed Noah, who shrugged. "Guilt money spends the same as any other kind?" "That's cynical." "That's practical. Very Blake of me. Don't you think?" The party ended at 1 a.m. As guests departed, each one whispered some version of the same sentiment. "You did it. You won. You showed them." But standing there in the emptying ballroom, surrounded by fairy lights and the detritus of genuine celebration, I realized they were all wrong. I hadn't won anything. I'd just stopped playing their game. Mara handed me the final paperwork as she left. "Everything's filed." Monday morning, Blake Dynamics announces its new direction. Your name will be on every press release. Rowan's name, I corrected. No, Emery Blake's. The woman who saved her father's company from himself and pledged the profits to protect the people he forgot. That's the story. Noah and I were the last to leave. As we waited for the elevator, I looked at the darkened entrance to the 14th floor ballroom. The Blake Dynamics anniversary banner still hung there, but someone had turned off the lights. Think they'll ever forgive you? Noah asked. I don't need their forgiveness. I needed their respect, and now I have something better, their understanding that I never needed either. The elevator arrived. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel, not the invisible daughter anymore, not the family disappointment. Just Emery Blake, soon to be Emery Carter, who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destroying those who'd hurt you. It was building something beautiful from the pieces they'd discarded. The next morning's Tribune headline read, Blake Dynamics restructures, pledges industry-leading safety standards. Below it, a smaller story, North Shore Safety Fund established with $10 million initial commitment, but I didn't see it until much later. That morning, I was having breakfast with Noah at our favorite diner, planning a small wedding, just us, our chosen family, and the promise of a future we'd build together. No Blakes required. The message was clear. You don't have to destroy your past to claim your future. Sometimes, you just have to price it correctly, package it professionally, and let the market decide what it's really worth. And sometimes, at the end of it all, you realize the real victory isn't in the revenge. It's in the revelation that you were never the one who needed saving. They were. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emery's position? Your perspectives and experiences make these stories richer for everyone.